They say love is the most natural thing in the world, that every human heart quietly longs for it and naturally knows how to receive it. But reality often whispers something different. Some people freeze when love appears. They grow uncomfortable when someone cares too much. Compliments feel suspicious. Kindness feels overwhelming. And affection, strangely, feels heavier than loneliness. Why does something so deeply desired suddenly feel unsafe when it finally arrives? Why do some people push away the very warmth they spent years craving? This quiet contradiction lives inside many hearts. A hidden tension between longing and resistance. A silent struggle that few people openly admit. Because the truth is, receiving love can sometimes feel more frightening than living without it. So what happens inside the mind of someone who struggles to receive love? And where does this invisible barrier come from? Let's begin. First, it appears subtle. Someone offers a sincere compliment. A friend expresses appreciation. A partner shows warmth that asks for nothing in return. And yet, something inside you quietly tightens. There is a pause, a hesitation. Instead of warmth spreading through the chest, there is a strange awareness, a sense of exposure. The mind searches for an escape, a quick joke to deflect the praise, a casual shrug to minimize the affection. It's nothing. It's not a big deal. You're exaggerating. But underneath those small responses lives a deeper reaction, discomfort. Because for some people, being loved does not immediately feel safe. It feels unfamiliar, almost like stepping into a room filled with light after spending years in dimness. The brightness itself becomes overwhelming. Why does this happen? Why can genuine care feel heavier than quiet distance? The answer often begins with emotional familiarity. The human mind naturally gravitates toward what it already knows, even if what it knows is not particularly kind. A person who has spent years feeling unnoticed becomes comfortable with invisibility. Someone who grew up learning that affection is rare may begin to see emotional distance as normal. And when love suddenly appears, the nervous system hesitates, not because love is unwanted, but because it is unfamiliar. Imagine carrying a silent belief for years, a quiet assumption that affection must always be earned, that approval is conditional, that warmth comes with hidden expectations. Then suddenly someone offers kindness freely. No test, no requirement, no transaction, just care. For a mind shaped by emotional caution, this can feel confusing. Questions quietly appear beneath the surface. Why are they being so kind? Do they expect something later? What if they discover the parts of me I try to hide? The compliment that was meant to comfort instead becomes something to analyze. Suspicion slowly replaces ease. And so the person does something that seems strange from the outside. They gently push the love away. Not dramatically, not intentionally, but subtly. They change the subject when appreciation appears. They laugh off sincere words. They shift attention back to the other person. Anything to reduce the spotlight. Because receiving love requires a moment of stillness. A moment where a person must allow themselves to be seen and valued. And for someone who is not used to that experience, the feeling can be deeply unsettling. It creates a quiet, emotional contradiction. A heart that longs for closeness, paired with a nervous system that does not quite trust it. This is the silent paradox many people carry. The desire to be loved, and the quiet discomfort of actually receiving it. No one is born afraid of love. In the beginning, the human heart is open. A child does not question affection. Warmth is received naturally, like sunlight touching skin. When someone smiles, the child smiles back. When someone reaches out, the child moves closer. Love at that stage feels simple. But over time, experiences begin to write quiet lessons inside the mind. Lessons that are rarely spoken aloud. Sometimes affection arrives, but only when expectations are met. Praise appears after good grades. Approval follows obedience. Warmth is offered only when behavior is correct. And slowly, a child begins to notice something subtle. Love seems conditional. It appears when things go well, and disappears when mistakes happen. At first, the mind simply adapts. It learns that affection must be earned, that closeness is something to work for. But in other moments, the experience becomes more confusing. Perhaps a parent is loving one day and distant the next. Warmth appears unexpectedly, then vanishes without explanation. For a developing mind, this inconsistency creates uncertainty. The question forms quietly, when will love disappear again? The nervous system begins paying attention. It watches closely. It learns to read moods, expressions, emotional shifts. Love no longer feels stable. It feels unpredictable. And sometimes the experience becomes even heavier. Moments when vulnerability was met with criticism. Times when emotional expression was dismissed. A child tries to share sadness and hears, "Stop being dramatic." A child reaches for comfort and receives silence. These moments may seem small from the outside, but inside the emotional memory, they leave deep impressions. Because the young mind does not interpret these experiences as temporary events. It interprets them as patterns. A quiet understanding begins to form. Opening the heart can lead to disappointment. Showing need can lead to rejection. Trusting closeness can bring pain. So the mind begins building protection. Not all at once, but slowly, layer by layer. A small hesitation appears when expressing feelings. A subtle distance forms during moments of vulnerability. Eventually, the person becomes skilled at emotional self-reliance. They learn how to handle things alone. They learn how to minimize their needs, how to stay composed, how to avoid depending too deeply on others. From the outside, this can look like strength, independence, emotional control. But beneath that calm surface, another truth quietly exists. A wall was built, not out of coldness, but out of survival. And years later, when someone offers genuine love, that same wall still stands. Not because love is unwanted, but because the mind once learned that letting it in could hurt. The human mind is quietly protective. It remembers emotional pain with remarkable clarity. Not to punish the heart, but to prevent it from experiencing the same wound again. Every meaningful relationship leaves small psychological fingerprints. Moments of warmth, moments of rejection, moments where closeness felt safe or suddenly unsafe. Over time, the brain begins organizing these memories into patterns. Psychologists often describe these patterns as attachment styles, emotional blueprints that guide how a person experiences closeness. Some people grow up learning that connection is safe and reliable. Love feels natural to receive. Trust develops easily. Affection flows without much hesitation. But for others, the emotional blueprint looks different. If early relationships were unpredictable, distant, or painful, the mind quietly adapts. It begins associating closeness with uncertainty. And uncertainty activates the brain's protective systems. Deep inside the nervous system lives a small but powerful structure, the amygdala. Its role is simple: detect danger. Whenever something feels threatening, the amygdala signals the body to prepare. Heart rate rises, muscles tighten, awareness sharpens. In situations of physical danger, this response protects survival. But emotional experiences can activate the same system. A raised voice, a moment of rejection, a memory of past abandonment, or even the vulnerability that comes with intimacy. For someone who has learned that closeness can lead to hurt, the brain begins reacting carefully whenever emotional intimacy appears. Not with conscious fear, but with subtle caution. A compliment may trigger doubt. An expression of affection may create a quiet urge to withdraw. Not because the love itself is harmful, but because the nervous system remembers older experiences. And the brain, in its protective wisdom, tries to prevent history from repeating. This process is called emotional conditioning. When certain experiences repeat often enough, the mind links them together. If closeness was once followed by disappointment, the brain may begin treating closeness as the warning sign, even when the present situation is completely different. So when someone expresses care, the The person who struggles to receive love may feel a strange tension. A quiet voice begins asking questions. What if this changes? What if they eventually leave? What if they see the parts of me I try to hide? The body becomes alert. The heart becomes guarded. And the mind does what it believes is safest. Creates distance. Not out of rejection, but out of protection. Because from the brain's perspective, emotional safety is always the priority. Even if that safety means keeping love slightly out of reach. This is the silent blueprint that shapes many relationships. A mind trying to protect a heart, even when the danger it fears no longer exists. The struggle to receive love is rarely simple. It is not a single emotion, not a single thought. It is a quiet conflict. One part of the heart moves toward warmth. Another part quietly pulls away. When someone expresses care, the first reaction might be softness. A small sense of relief. A moment where the heart feels recognized. But almost immediately, another feeling appears. Caution. The mind begins observing the moment closely, analyzing every word, every gesture. Are they truly sincere? Will this last? Am I misunderstanding their intentions? These questions do not come from cynicism. They come from memory. Somewhere in the past, closeness was followed by disappointment. And the mind remembers. So two forces begin operating at the same time. The longing for connection and the instinct to protect. Imagine standing near the edge of warm water after years of cold weather. Part of you wants to step forward and feel the warmth fully, but another part hesitates. What if the water suddenly turns cold again? This hesitation becomes an emotional pattern. The person might crave affection deeply. They may daydream about closeness, companionship, emotional safety. Yet when love actually appears, the experience feels overwhelming. Because receiving love requires a certain vulnerability. It requires allowing another person to matter. And when someone matters, their absence can hurt. For someone who has experienced emotional loss before, this possibility becomes difficult to ignore. So the mind tries to manage the risk, sometimes by minimizing the relationship, other times by questioning the sincerity of the affection, and occasionally by creating distance before the bond grows too strong. From the outside, these reactions can look confusing. Someone may wonder, why are they pushing me away when I'm only trying to care? But internally, the person experiencing this conflict often feels equally confused. They may question themselves. Why can't I just accept this? Why does kindness make me uncomfortable? What is wrong with me? These thoughts create another layer of pain, because the person begins to feel guilty for struggling with something that seems natural for everyone else. Yet the truth is quieter and far more human. There is nothing broken about the heart that hesitates. It simply remembers. And when love arrives after years of emotional caution, the heart does not immediately know how to respond. So it moves slowly, one step forward, one step back, caught between desire and protection. This is the invisible tension many people carry, a longing for love that is real and deep, and a nervous system that still remembers how fragile closeness once felt. Love does something quiet but powerful. It sees not just the surface, the polite smiles, the practiced confidence, the calm composure shown to the world. Love has a way of noticing what lies underneath. The tiredness hidden behind laughter, the hesitation behind confidence, the wounds that were carefully placed out of sight. For many people, this kind of emotional visibility feels comforting. But for someone who struggles to receive love, it can feel deeply unsettling. Because being loved means being known. And being known means that certain walls can no longer remain invisible. Over time, many people learn how to present a version of themselves that feels safe. A controlled version, a composed version, one that hides uncertainty, one that hides vulnerability. This mask is not deception. It is protection. The mind quietly learns which emotions are acceptable to show, and which ones are safer to keep hidden. Maybe sadness once received little comfort. Maybe vulnerability was misunderstood. Maybe certain feelings were labeled as weakness. So the person adapts. They become skilled at managing their image. They appear strong, independent, emotionally self-contained. And for years, this strategy works. Relationships remain comfortable at a distance. Conversations stay within safe territory. No one looks too closely, but genuine love behaves differently. It asks for closeness, not aggressively, not forcefully, but naturally. A partner becomes curious about deeper thoughts. A friend notices when something feels off. Someone expresses care that reaches beyond the surface. And suddenly the protective mask feels fragile. Because if someone sees too much, they might discover the parts that feel difficult to accept. Old insecurities, unspoken fears, memories of past mistakes. Questions quietly appear. What if they see the real version of me? What if that version isn't lovable? This fear is rarely spoken aloud, yet it quietly shapes emotional behavior. The person may withdraw slightly when affection becomes intense. They may redirect conversations away from deeper feelings. They may even question the sincerity of the love itself. Not because they doubt the other person, but because they doubt their own worthiness. It feels safer to maintain a small distance than to risk full exposure. Because full exposure means standing without emotional armor. And for someone who has spent years protecting their inner world, that level of openness can feel frightening. Yet within that fear lies something deeply human. The quiet hope that someone might see everything and still choose to stay. Patterns often remain invisible while they are happening. They feel normal. A person deflects a compliment, changes the subject when someone expresses affection, downplays their importance in someone else's life. And these reactions happen so naturally that they rarely invite reflection. They simply feel like part of one's personality. But occasionally, something quiet interrupts the pattern. A small moment of awareness. Perhaps someone gently points it out. You always laugh when someone compliments you. Or a friend notices the distance that appears whenever conversations grow emotional. Why do you always change the subject when someone cares about you? At first, the observation might feel surprising, even uncomfortable, because the behavior was never meant to be noticeable. It was simply a habit, a protective reflex developed over years. Yet once the pattern is named, it becomes difficult to ignore. The person begins noticing it everywhere. During conversations, during relationships, during moments of affection. Someone offers kindness, and the mind immediately searches for a way to soften or dismiss it. Someone expresses appreciation, and the person instinctively redirects the attention elsewhere. And slowly, a realization begins to emerge. The distance that exists in relationships may not always come from the outside. Sometimes it quietly comes from within. This realization can feel both illuminating and painful, because it reveals something unexpected. The love that felt absent in many moments may not have been entirely absent. Sometimes it was present, but difficult to accept. This awareness does not immediately dissolve the pattern. The old reactions still appear. The hesitation still exists. But now there is a new element inside the experience. Observation. Instead of reacting automatically, the person begins to notice their response. They feel the instinct to withdraw and recognize it. They hear the compliment and notice the urge to deflect it. This small gap between reaction and awareness becomes important, because within that space lies the possibility of change. Not dramatic transformation, not sudden emotional openness, but a quiet shift in understanding. The person begins to realize that their relationship with love has been shaped by past experiences. Not by personal failure, not by some hidden flaw, but by patterns that once helped them feel safe. And once that understanding appears, the story slowly begins to change. The walls no longer feel like permanent structures. They begin to look more like habits. Habits that the mind once built to survive. And habits that awareness can slowly soften. Awareness rarely transforms the heart overnight. It simply opens a small window. A window where a person begins noticing their reactions instead of being completely guided by them. The old patterns still appear. A compliment still feels slightly uncomfortable. Affection still creates a moment of hesitation, but something new quietly exists alongside those reactions. Curiosity. Instead of immediately dismissing kindness, the person begins pausing, just for a moment, long enough to observe the feeling. Someone says, "You matter to me," and instead of quickly responding with humor or deflection, there is a brief silence. Not awkward silence, reflective silence. Inside that pause, the mind notices its familiar instincts, the urge to minimize the words, the urge to redirect attention. But now those instincts are visible, and visibility changes the experience. Because once a pattern is seen clearly, it becomes slightly easier to question. Is this reaction protecting me or limiting me? The question does not demand an answer. It simply exists. Over time, this small shift begins changing the emotional landscape. The person may still feel uncomfortable receiving praise, but they allow the compliment to remain in the air a little longer before dismissing it. Someone expresses care, and instead of stepping away emotionally, the person allows themselves to sit with the warmth, even if it feels unfamiliar. This process can feel surprisingly vulnerable, because without the old defenses, affection reaches deeper places, places that once stayed guarded. It might feel similar to standing in sunlight after years of shade. At first, the brightness feels intense, almost overwhelming, but gradually the warmth becomes easier to tolerate. The nervous system slowly learns something new. Closeness does not always lead to pain. Kindness does not always carry hidden expectations. Love can exist without conditions. These realizations do not erase the past. The memories that shaped the person are still there, but new experiences begin adding different emotional references. Moments where affection remains steady. Moments where vulnerability is met with patience. Moments where care does not disappear when imperfections appear. Each of these experiences gently challenges the old belief that love must always be fragile or temporary. And with time, the internal wall begins to soften, not collapsing suddenly, but becoming more flexible, more open, because the heart slowly learns something it once struggled to believe. That receiving love does not mean losing control. Sometimes it simply means allowing warmth to reach the places that once felt safest in the dark. For many people, courage is often imagined as something loud. Bold decisions, dramatic changes, moments of visible strength. But some forms of courage are much quieter. Receiving love is one of them, because for someone who has spent years protecting their heart, accepting affection requires something deeply vulnerable. It means lowering the guard that once kept pain away. It means allowing another person to step closer than the mind is used to. And closeness always carries uncertainty. No relationship arrives with a guarantee. No bond promises permanence. Love always involves risk. Yet the courage lies in allowing that risk to exist. Not blindly, not recklessly, but with awareness. A person who once struggled to receive love slowly begins recognizing that protection and isolation are not the same thing. The walls that once kept pain away also kept warmth at a distance. They preserved safety, but limited connection. And eventually a quiet question appears inside the mind. What if love is not something that must be perfectly controlled? What if it is something that can simply be experienced? Not every moment of affection needs to be analyzed. Not every expression of care needs to be questioned. Sometimes kindness can simply exist as it is. And when someone allows themselves to receive that kindness, something subtle changes. The nervous system softens. The body begins recognizing closeness as less threatening. Moments of affection begin feeling less overwhelming. This shift does not erase fear entirely. Even people who feel comfortable with love still experience moments of doubt, still feel moments of vulnerability. But the difference lies in what happens next. Instead of retreating immediately, the person remains present. They allow the warmth to stay. They allow themselves to believe that care can be genuine, that they are not required to earn every expression of affection. And slowly, receiving love begins to feel less like exposure and more like connection. Not perfect connection, not effortless connection, but real connection. the kind that grows quietly through patience and presence. In this way, accepting love becomes a form of courage, not because it eliminates fear, but because it allows closeness despite it. And that quiet willingness to be seen, to be valued, to be cared for, is one of the most human strengths a heart can develop. If this reflection felt familiar, if parts of this journey quietly mirrored something inside your own experience, then perhaps you are not alone in this feeling. Many hearts carry the silent tension between longing for love and learning how to receive it. Sometimes the hesitation you feel is not a sign of distance or indifference. Sometimes it is simply the echo of old experiences that once taught the heart to be careful. And yet, the very fact that something inside you recognizes these patterns means awareness has already begun. Awareness is often the first quiet step toward emotional freedom. If this video made you feel seen, if something quiet inside you was gently understood here, then this space will always remain open for reflections like these. A place where the hidden corners of the human heart are explored with patience and compassion. And if you would like to stay connected to more reflections like this, you are always welcome here. Subscribing is simply a way to continue these conversations together. And if you ever feel comfortable sharing your thoughts or experiences in the comments, your words may quietly remind someone else that they are not alone in their own inner world. But sharing is always optional. Your presence here is already enough. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.